Earlier this week, former U.S. Ambassador John Huntsman accused his alma mater, the University of Pennsylvania, of anti-Semitism over the school's response to the Hamas attack on Israel and for hosting a recent event that included speakers with a history of making anti-Semitic remarks. The Huntsman family has donated tens of millions of dollars to the school over the past few decades. Huntsman cut off support, telling the school its silence is anti-Semitism. Meanwhile, Harvard University has had two major donors cut ties since the Hamas attack, citing a letter that more than 30 Harvard student groups initially signed that said they held Israel entirely responsible for all unfolding violence in the conflict. Joining us now is Vice Provost for Global Initiatives at the University of Pennsylvania, Dr. Zeke Emanuel. He's out with a new op-ed for the New York Times entitled The Moral Deficiencies of a Liberal Education. Also with us for the conversation, professor at Princeton University, Eddie Glaude Jr. Good to have you both.
Thank you both for being with us. Zeke, your college, UPenn, has been at the center of this controversy. And you write in this New York Times op-ed about the moral deficiencies of liberal education. Students spouting ideological catchphrases have revealed their moral obliviousness of the deficiency of their educations, but the deeper problem is not them. It is what they're being taught, or more specifically, what they are not being taught. I would just say college students throughout time have spouted moral catchphrases. It's why they go to get a liberal education, to learn and to try to develop ideologically. The bigger problem, it seems to me, is with university officials. First of all, who are allowing hatred, just outright anti-Semitism on their campuses, and secondly, who, whether it's at UPenn or at Harvard, can't call terrorism terrorism.
This topic has been sitting on my mind for at least a week, and that is the topic of the establishment copes with the loss of their narrative. And that's what's happening. We're seeing here with the protests, because the just massive support for the Palestinian plight, they can't ignore, especially when the Jewish organization that protested Capitol Hill yesterday. It feels shocking to the establishment. It feels shocking. And I can't remember which show I saw a poll on, but it was showing support for Israel by age, and the lowest age bracket they had was 18 to 35, and it showed that support in the 30s, which to them was astonishing, because if you went to the top tier, which topped out at 85, it was in the 80s, it topped out there. So it's a 50+% difference. As it got older, 50 plus is when you cross the 50% mark. So they have completely lost the narrative, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. So the establishment copes with the loss of the narrative control, I should say, and it was all over Morning Joe, which is what we're going to be examining today. And if we have time, we're going to cover also how the NATO left is both pro-Israel and pro-Palestinian at the same time, and they're walking this line where they're supporting a party that is doing this and supporting funding and supporting Iron Domes, as AOC says recently, but then at the same time coming out and saying things in support of Palestinians. But the best support you can give them would be to stop funding Israel. That would be the best support. And I saw a report actually this morning. They're talking about, it was on Fox. They're talking about 60 billion for Ukraine and 100 billion for Israel. Yeah, and the 60 billion they were saying this was a Republican senator. Yeah, it was on Morning Joe. That's where I saw it. So Republican senator, they entered and they were saying, what's up with the support for Ukraine and Israel? What's going on? We need to get things cracking over here because of the speakership thing. So yeah, that's where I saw that number. 100 billion to Israel. Like, so I think I will rewind it because it's important to cover. Because when they bring on intelligence people, let's watch.
Between some top universities and their longtime major donors. Earlier this week, former U.S. Ambassador John Huntsman accused his alma mater, the University of Pennsylvania, of anti-Semitism over the school's response to the Hamas attack on Israel and for hosting.
So it goes without saying, and most of us in this community, but if you are a drive-by person or new, it goes without saying, anti-Semitism, the word and the usage of the concept, is being co-opted and misused to mass. If you're against Israel, you're anti-Semitic. That's what it is. And that's just simply not the definition of anti-Semitism. But let's read a couple of these headlines they have here. Bloomberg, University of Pennsylvania donor pile pressure on school as David Mergerman pulls support. And I'm assuming that's a story, because if they're putting it up here, this is a story about there is support, pro-Palestinian support on the campus. Do something about it. UPenn loses big donor board. Member resigns citing anti-Semitism. Former U.S. Ambassador John Huntsman to cease donation to UPenn over school's response to Hamas attack. Another major UPenn donor pulls support over school's response to Hamas as others set to follow. And now let's continue with their segment.
A recent event that included speakers with a history of making anti-Semitic remarks. The Huntsman family has donated tens of millions of dollars to the school over the past few decades. Huntsman cut off support, telling the school its silence is anti-Semitism. Meanwhile,
you see, being silent is anti-Semitism.
Harvard University has had two major donors cut ties since the Hamas attack, citing a letter that more than 30 Harvard student groups initially signed that said they held Israel entirely responsible for all unfolding violence.
All unfolding violence. But look at the headline there. It says Foundation cuts tie with Harvard amid fallout over Israel-Hamas conflict. But look at the picture. The picture says, stop the genocide in Gaza. I have a TV here, so sometimes I'll look at that. If my computer is moving slow, I can look there and see. So, like right now, I have a pop-up on my screen. But that's a picture that says, stop the genocide in Gaza. And there's apparently some other pictures. Let me see if I can see those. It says, Harvard occupied Palestine. I can't read the whole thing because there's some people in front of it, but you get the point of what I'm saying. Let's continue, though, with the clip.
In the conflict. Joining us now is Vice Provost for Global Initiatives at the University of Pennsylvania, Dr. Zeke Emanuel. He's out with a new op-ed for the New York Times entitled The Moral Deficiencies of a Liberal Education.
The moral deficiencies of a liberal education. Oh, I guess that's better if I just tap my ear. Pauses it better. The audacity of the story of record, aka the liars of record, giving any advice on the moral deficiencies of anything. That's pretty rich. But let's continue.
Education. Also with us for the conversation, professor at Princeton University, Eddie Glaude.
Now, do you know, I should have said this. Let's go back. We need to say this. I need to say this. You know who this is. You know Rob Emanuel? This is Rob Emanuel's brother. So let's continue. Just full disclosure.
At the University of Pennsylvania, Dr. Zeke Emanuel. He's out with a new op-ed for the New York Times entitled The Moral Deficiencies of a Liberal Education. Also with us for the conversation, professor at Princeton University, Eddie Glaude Jr. Good to have you both.
Thank you both for being with us. Zeke, your college, UPenn, has been at the center of this controversy. And you write in this New York Times op-ed about the moral deficiencies of liberal education. Students spouting ideological catchphrases have revealed their moral obliviousness and the deficiency of their educations, but the deeper problem is not them. It is what they're being taught, or more specifically, what they are not being taught. And
what they're not being taught. So this is the establishment saying, wait, what's going on here? Why aren't these students being sufficiently brainwashed here? What's happening? That's why they're saying it's not the universities. It's not the students' fault. It's not the students' fault. It's the fault of the university because they're not what? They're not teaching something specific, a specific way to think on this topic. They're saying it out in the open because they're not talking to us.
I would just say college students throughout time have spouted moral catchphrases. It's why they go to get a liberal education, to learn and to try to develop ideologically. The bigger problem, it seems to me, is with the university officials. First of all, who are allowing hatred just outright anti-Semitism on their campuses, and secondly, who whether it's at UPenn or at Harvard, can't call terrorism terrorism.
We can't call the Palestinian resistance fighting back against the colonial settler project if you refuse to call that terrorism. This is where they feel the whole purpose behind United States education is to teach you enough so that you can be a worker and worker register and know basic numbers, and to propagandize you. That is the top reason for the United States education. And they're saying it's not delivering brainwashed young people.
Let's distinguish the whole point of liberal education, what we're doing when we certify a student with a diploma, from the response of universities. I do take issue with the fact that we at the University of Pennsylvania have an anti-Semitic campus. I just don't experience that. Do we have people who are anti-Semitic on campus and spouting anti-Semitic things? Yes. Is the general atmosphere on campus anti-Semitic? I'm very identified as Jewish. I was born in Israel. I don't think that's true. What I think we have...
But Zeke, let me ask you, though, why did it take the president of Penn so long to call terrorism terrorism?
I will tell you, I think that's a problem. And I, for one, was urging a statement. Look, at the University of Pennsylvania, any elite university, about a quarter of our students, actually a little more than a quarter of our students, our undergraduates, our graduate students, our professional students, are from overseas. Many of our students, whether Muslim and Arab or...
Did you hear, Mika, when the video of the students of the this march, did you hear her reaction? I'm going to replay it before I just divulge what it is, just in case you didn't hear it. I want to see if you can hear what she says. Rewind it back 15 seconds. So about 7 seconds is going to play before you hear it.
At the University of Pennsylvania, any elite university, about a quarter of our students, actually a little more than a quarter of our students, our undergraduates, our graduate students, our professional students, are from overseas. Many of our students, whether Muslim and Arab.
She was like, oh. This to them is an out of control working class here. They're like, oh shit. They're not walking in lockstep. All right, let me let it play some more before I give more comment here.
Or Jewish or Israeli have deep ties to the region, identify with the region, and we're traumatized by this. We can't say this isn't a campus thing. This is very much a campus thing. We had students in Israel, we had students in Lebanon. So we have to make a statement. I don't think there's two questions about that. I don't think it's anti-Semitism that didn't make a statement. And our university president, I have to say, was pretty clear that this was immoral, unprovoked, illegal international act. I think the bigger problem is when our students can't seem to understand that there is a tension in the...
Can't seem to understand is him describing what he would say behind closed door to the ruling establishment. They're not believing what the fuck we want them to believe. That's how it's a very uneasy way to describe something. Can't seem to understand. What does that mean? You tell me something, I have a different opinion than yours. You describe that as can't seem to understand. This is why we see clampdown on social media. This is why we see the censorship. The establishment has lost the ability to control the narrative. Less and less people are watching cable news, network news. Less and less, like it has hit rock bottom. People on YouTube are getting more views than corporate and cable media. It is remarkable, and this is them panicking because they're seeing now the results of the loss of narrative control.
These the moral tensions, the values at stake, blame Israel for an unprovoked attack with more Jewish deaths in almost 80 years since 1945. That's a deficiency in them, and we are responsible to some degree in that because we haven't given them the educational tools. They're at a very formative stage, and they're
We
wrestling
haven't
with
brainwashed
issues.
them.
If what they latch onto are catchphrases and ideologies, that's a problem. We have to make them think deeper. What values do you hold clear? We have very
You see how now they may just be pretending. They have to dumb down because it's the opposite of what they're saying. They're trying to say you're latching on to catchphrases and we need to give you the detail when it's the opposite. The reason they've come to be pro-Palestinian is because they know the detail. That's why. I would say the people who know less, I would say the people who are pro-Israel, not part of any government, because they would have a reason to be that. I'm saying they're largely brainwashed, propagandized, and uninformed. But let's continue. Oops, I gotta hit it over here, I guess.
very clear moral truths we all hold. Slavery is wrong. Killing someone because of their sexual orientation is wrong.
How dare you? How dare you include slavery in this nonsense that you pushing? Because slavery is the very example that proves the righteous support for Palestinians. This is why Black solidarity is so solid. This is why you see a lot of Black people speaking out forcefully. If you're not seeing it, you can certainly see it here on RBN, because we see their plight right now was our plight, decades ago. We're just further along in the masking that the plight is over. That's all. Changing things like, slave patrols to police officers. That's what I mean. We're just further along in the masking of the process, but we see a lot of similarities, and the establishment just cannot cope with this because they don't know what else to do. What can they do to reach these people, to them, and from their perspective?
Violating someone's body without their consent is wrong. Those aren't equivocal. Now, from that, we can build up real reasons why this kind of attack was morally horrific. There's no question, and it wasn't Israel that was responsible.
And we do need to get to the question of the failings of liberal education, your op-ed. I do want to just ask Eddie. I want to bring Eddie in here, Professor.
They always find a Black person in academia willing to sell out. And I'm not surprised, but you don't see Eddie Glau. He's usually the one that is in media that is closest to a radical left position, or at least he'll speak to it, even if he's just trying to bring it up as let's think about this. I'm not saying this is me, but let's think about this part. But he understands, or a person in this position, in this sort of Negro servant position, understands there's going to be times he's going to be called on to sell out communities. And this is a time he's being called on to sell out a community. But yeah, let's continue with the video.
Zeke said it. We have a lot of international students on our campuses because regardless of what people say on the left and the right, we've got the greatest colleges and universities in the world. That's why people send their children to America. And among those that come to America, I had a friend at the University of Alabama in the mid-'80s who was Palestinian and had a belt buckle on that said Jerusalem on it. And he spoke very passionately, very respectfully, but very passionately about how he felt his people had been subjugated by Israelis for, a generation. So two things can be true at one time. And that is certainly something, while I grieve for Israel, and I certainly grieve for Jewish students, many of whom were afraid to go to class last Friday.
Really? Are you talking about the ones that went to Capitol Hill?
Students who also have grieved over the loss of loved ones or the situation there. That
the
said,
loved ones and the
as
situation
you and I
there,
always say, two things can be true at one time. We should be able to call terrorism, right? What happened in Israel was terrorism, and university leaders should be able to
What's
do
happening
that.
in Israel is
And provide
terrorism. And what's
context,
happening in Gaza
but
Strip
do
is
that
terrorism.
and say terrorism is terrorism, and what we saw in Israel was terrorism.
Well, sure. I think what it's important for university leaders to make it clear that what happened in Israel was horrific, was cruel, and was against international law. It was a war crime. But I think it's important also, Joe. This is the tension. The moment in which one acknowledges that, and then to make the second move, and the second move is to try to give context to the broader historical situation. That's when people got upset. And, university leaders have to be responsible for all of their students, not only those.
So this is so fucking cowardly. That little blip, couple of words, that's them addressing the issue of being a colonial settler project. If you didn't hear it, he said a couple of words about it right there. And Joe Scarborough kind of prefaced it. Let's listen. Let me go back maybe 45 seconds and let's listen.
The loss of loved ones or the situation there. That said, as you and I always say, two things can be true at one time. We should be able to call terrorism terrorism.
Two things can be true at one time. Now, let me go back some more so you can see what he's talking about. Two things can be true at one time.
And had a belt buckle on that said Jerusalem on it. And he spoke very passionately, very respectfully, but very passionately about how he felt his people had been subjugated by Israelis for, a generation. So two things can be true at one time. And that is certainly something,
Two things can be true at one time. That's them acknowledging the situation in Palestine. Because Joe knows that what maybe Eddie Gile has limits of his Negro servitude. Like he won't go as far as some other people. So he has to preface what he knows Eddie Gile was about to gonna at least reference to. And that's what Joe Scarborough is doing right now. In the softest language, they're trying, or they are in their minds acknowledging that Palestinians can be getting the short end of this deal and what they call the Hamas as a terrorist organization or a terrorist attack. They're saying both of those can be true at the same time. And then he pivots to the shuck and jive black guy in here to put a dot the I and cross the T.
I grieve for Israel, and I certainly grieve for Jewish students, many of whom were afraid to go to class last Friday. Also, of course, there are many Palestinian students who also have grieved over the loss of loved ones or the situation there. That said, as you and I always say, two things can be true at one time. We should be able to call terrorism terrorism, right? What happened in Israel was terrorism, and university leaders should be able to do that and provide context, but
say that was terrorism and provide context, meaning I guess you can acknowledge that Israel is pretty brutal with their responses. This doesn't in any way mean say this is a colonial project. They're not going that far, but listen to Eddie Glau now.
Do that and say terrorism is terrorism, and what we saw in Israel was terrorism.
Well, sure. I think what it's important for university leaders to make it clear that what happened in Israel was horrific, was cruel, and was against international law. It was a war crime. But I think it's important also, Joe. This is the tension. The moment in which one acknowledges that, and then to make the second move, and the second move is to try to give context to the broader historical situation.
Give context to the broader historical situation. That's them saying, yes, it was a bad situation the Palestinians got. They lost so much land. That's them acknowledging that in just those few words. But let's see what else he says.
That's when people got upset. And, university leaders have to be responsible for all of their students, not only those students who were grieving over the horrific acts in Israel, but those students who are Palestinian, those students who are Muslim. And our president of Princeton offered I thought, a really extraordinarily balanced and powerful condemnation of what happened, and as well as an acknowledgement of the broader context and the students on our campus. So it's that I think that's really important. But when we're in this moment where you're just saying you just need to acknowledge and be outraged, acknowledge the terroristic act and be outraged about that with no further context, that goes against, I think, what universities and colleges are trying.
It's such a hard topic for them to address. Am I the only one that's feeling like you feel him uncomfortable? I feel that he's uncomfortable here. And they panned away from Dr. Emmanuel, I think that's his name, because he started to make faces about what Eddie Glaude was saying. But this is Eddie Glaude was brought on here specifically to deliver sort of what they would view as bad news, but it's that, hey, we do have to provide context here. My bad, I went back too far.
University leaders to make it clear that what
watch
happened in Israel was
Dr.
horrific,
Emmanuel's face.
was cruel, and was against international law. It was a war crime. But I think it's important also, Joe. This is the tension. The moment in which one acknowledges that, and then to make the second move, and the second move is to try to give context to the broader historical situation. That's when people got upset. And, university leaders have to be responsible for all of their students, not only those students who are grieving over the horrific acts in Israel, but those students who are Palestinian, those students who are Muslim. And our president in Princeton offered a really extraordinarily balanced and powerful condemnation of what happened, and as well as an acknowledgement of the broader context and the students on our campus. So it's that, I think, that's really important.
How much you can bet if we read the statement that Eddie Glaude is saying, we would think that statement is terrible from Princeton. But now, so let's watch the guy on the left's face as you see the guy on the right talk.
Important, but when we're in this moment where you're just saying you just need to acknowledge and be outraged, acknowledge the terroristic act and be outraged about that with no further context, that goes against, I think, what universities and colleges are trying to teach, and that is to understand the moral complexity of the situations before we act, if that makes sense.
So can I say one thing?
Right.
At the University
he
of
wasn't happy
Pennsylvania,
about that.
One of the things we did right after that is to schedule a panel that did discuss the moral complexities, going back in time to things that happened. 2006, when Hamas, we had the Oslo Accords in.
They want you to be like an AOC. They want you to, they basically, okay, we'll settle for an AOC then, where you're going to vote for the Iron Dome, and she said that recently, where you're going to vote for all the funding, where you're going to speak out and call it terrorists, but you can also say some stuff about Palestinians. That's as far as they want this to go with young people, and that's the dividing line to them. But let's finish this out.
1993, and then in 1996, when Hamas began doing bus bombings in Jerusalem because it was feeling like it was being cut off, we then talked about Netanyahu's rise, his open hostility for years and years against a Palestinian state. That is important context. That is critical for understanding the complexities of the situation. But the immediate condemnation of an unprovoked attack directed at civilians that turns out to be a massacre, that's not a complicated moral thing. And part of the most important thing to teach our students is to call out violations that aren't complicated. The balancing of multiple different values in a moral dilemma, that is complicated, and we have to help them reason that too. But if they can't even make the first statement, that's morally wrong, we've lost.
And I think we all here agree that it is morally wrong. And obviously, these are terror acts, and it should be called out immediately. And I remain disturbed by those university presidents that were.
But we call out terror acts done by Israel on the people of Palestine before this, all of this recent stuff. So 2 weeks ago, we call out stuff all the time. And we point to you saying, what's going on? Why nobody's calling this out? Seems pretty one-sided.
We're not able to do that. There will be, again, context provided in the weeks and months ahead about all of these issues, Mika, which have led us to the point that we're at right now, which is a real tragedy. And again, that includes all the things,
all the stuttering in this
and what
segment
was talking about,
so telling.
As well as the fact that Hamas has been a terror organization that's been running Gaza as an authoritarian state since 2007. killing Palestinians or crowding out Palestinians who wanted a two-state solution.
Right. I mean, it's also opportunities for learning. You know, Zeke, in your op-ed for the New York Times, you write in part, quote, when a coalition of 34 student organizations at Harvard can say that they hold the Israeli regime entirely responsible for all unfolding violence, and students at other elite universities blame Israel alone for the attack Hamas carried out on Israelis on October 7th, or even praise the massacre, something is deeply wrong at America's colleges and universities.
This is the article, New York Times, the moral deficiencies of a liberal education. Let me zoom in here. Quote, hold the Israeli regime entirely responsible for all unfolding violence. That sounds pretty spot on accurate to me. If you come, so for example, let me give you an analogy. You're at your house and let's do this analogy. You're at your house watching whatever you watch, if it's a cooking show, if it's a sports show, whatever you watch, a movie, television show, you're watching this at home with your family. Somebody kicks in your door and tells you to get the fuck out of here. This is my house now. Wouldn't you say any preceding violence that comes from after this point is blamed on you, sir, the intruder? Wouldn't you say that? So why is this different? Why for Palestinians, why is that different? Because any rational person, if this happened to them, they would have this point of view. Sir, if you don't get the fuck out of my house, I'm gonna bust your ass. You get what I'm saying? Any violence that extends after this point that you've intruded my house is on you. So that's the point, and I'll allow the clip to play. But let me. There was a second part that I also wanted to point out, and it's Israel blames Israel alone. Something is deeply wrong at America's colleges and universities, and it's not in the way that you and I think. It's in the way of speaking to the ruling class, saying something's wrong at our universities, that they're not properly propagandizing people.
Those of us who are university leaders and faculty are at fault. We may graduate our students, confer degrees that certify their qualifications as the best and brightest, but we have clearly failed to educate them. We have failed to give them the ethical foundation and moral compass to recognize the basics of humanity.
Really, I find that will be likely hard for you to do, Uncle Sam, considering the genocide of the native populations and the enslavement of African people. You're going to find that a little hard to do, and we have failed to give them the ethical foundation and moral compass to recognize the basics of humanity. I would say it this way. In spite of the propaganda we try to give them, they have still found a way to cultivate an ethical foundation with a moral compass that recognizes basic humanity in spite of the propaganda we attempted to instill on them.
We in the academy need to look more deeply at how it is possible that so many undergraduates, graduate students, law students, and faculty at our nation's finest colleges and universities could have such moral blinders. And I know Zeke just mentioned UPenn had a panel discussion. I know Dartmouth had one that was sent to me, a link, but maybe there needs to be one university-wide across the entire system.
Well,
really look at this time for learning.
This is something.
Maybe we need to have a nationwide brainwashing session across all universities. Wasn't Hillary Clinton just talking about something like this? Deprogramming camps or whatever, however she phrased it. Are they telling us of something that's coming? Are they foreshadowing something that would at least be attempted? Let me show you a couple of headlines and then we'll get back to this. So this one talks about the Harvard students. Harvard students accused Obama of genocide and pro-Palestinian die-in. So they had a pro-Palestinian die-in, which is like a direct action. They come in and they die, or they lay down as if the dead bodies of the Palestinians that are being butchered. And so there's a picture I just wanted to show you. of that. And then let's show another headline here. This one is, I think, from a Jewish publication, the J Post. Anti-Semitism on U.S. campuses, an old phenomenon. Now, this is them going into a made-up history and connecting it to a real history of anti-Semitism. You get what I'm saying? Like, this is co-opting of anti-Semitism. But anyway, let's show another article, and I'm giving you sort of an overview because just in case some of you go and look for that title, I do want you to know sort of a heads up of what's in these pieces, in particular that one. I think I have one more. Israel-Hamas conflict, why Harvard University has become a poster child for America's culture war. Harvard University has become emboldened in a controversy over the Israel-Hamas conflict and issues of free speech, academic freedom, and anti-Semitism. It started when a coalition of students groups blamed Israel for violence. Harvard's president condemned the statement, but some alumni and donors accused the signatures of being anti-Semite. The university had not taken official stands, but reaffirmed its commitment to free expression. The controversy reflects wider division in the U.S. Harvard University, one of the most prestigious and influential institutions in the world. The controversy started when a coalition of Black students calling themselves the Harvard Palestinian Solidarity Group issued a statement on October 8th, blaming Israel for the violence that erupted after Hamas launched a surprise cross-border attack on Israel on October 7, 2023. The statement said that the students, quote, hold the Israeli regime entirely responsible for all unfolding violence, end quote, and that quote, the apartheid regime is the only one to blame, end quote, for the attacks. The statement also called on Harvard community to take action to stop ongoing annihilation of Palestinians. So this is what has the establishment's brain on fire. Students having the audacity to think for themselves, study a particular topic, to think for themselves and come to a conclusion that does not have the seal of approval of the establishment.